One of the most barbaric figures of the entire Third Reich, and as a result has probably got about 1 million people against his name who he'd murdered.
What if some of the most notorious Nazi war criminals were never caught? What if entire networks existed to help them escape justice? After World War II, hundreds of high-ranking Nazis vanished, only to reappear in Argentina. But was it just luck, or was there something more sinister at play? Why did so many Nazi officers flee to Argentina after World War II? Let's find out. When World War II ended in 1945, the Allies swept through Europe, uncovering the full extent of Nazi atrocities. Concentration camps were liberated, war criminals were arrested, and the world braced for the historic Nuremberg trials. Some of the biggest names in Hitler's regime, Hermann Göring and Heinrich Himmler, were either captured or took their own lives before they could be tried. But not all of them were caught. Some simply vanished. It sounds unbelievable. How could the men responsible for orchestrating genocide and waging a global war just disappear? But the reality is, not everyone wanted them brought to justice. Some countries saw them as too useful to punish, others as potential allies, and some, they just didn't care enough to stop them. And that brings us to Argentina. Argentina didn't suddenly decide to welcome Nazi war criminals after 1945. This was decades in the making. The country's ties to Germany had been strengthening long before the war even started, creating the perfect environment for escaping Nazis to slip in unnoticed. To understand why Argentina became a Nazi refuge, we have to go back to the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Argentina had always been a land of immigrants. Between 1869 and 1914, its population exploded from 1.7 million to nearly 8 million. Most of these newcomers came from Italy and Spain, but among them were about 100,000 German speakers. They settled in Buenos Aires and surrounding provinces, bringing their language, traditions, and most importantly, strong ties to Germany. Unlike other immigrant groups, German-Argentines didn't just integrate and move on. They kept their cultural identity alive, maintaining deep loyalty to their homeland. They built German-language schools, newspapers, and businesses, ensuring that future generations grew up immersed in German culture. By the 1920s and 1930s, German influence in Argentina had only grown stronger. German-run companies dominated industries like banking, trade, and manufacturing. German schools flourished, shaping young minds with pro-German ideals. Even Argentina's military had a deep admiration for Germany. Many officers trained alongside the German army, and German experts were brought in to modernize Argentina's military. But when Hitler came to power in the 1930s, these friendly ties took a darker turn. Nazi Germany quickly realized that Argentina wasn't just a distant ally, it was a valuable strategic foothold in South America. The Nazis actively targeted the German-Argentine community, trying to win their loyalty and shape their views. Local Nazi groups called the Landesgruppe took control of German-language schools, cultural clubs, and even workers' unions, spreading pro-Hitler propaganda everywhere they could. Berlin sent money to Buenos Aires to fund newspapers and political groups sympathetic to the Nazi cause, pushing their message deep into everyday life. Even the children weren't safe from this influence. They were encouraged to join Nazi youth programs, taught to think of themselves as future members of Hitler's Reich. But here's the thing, not everyone was on board with Hitler. Plenty of German-Argentines had fled to Europe to escape Nazi oppression, or they simply wanted to stay away from politics altogether. This disagreement split the German community in Argentina. On one side were the devoted Nazi supporters, ready to use threats or violence to silence anyone who opposed them. On the other were those who resisted the Reich's influence and wanted nothing to do with Nazi ideology. It created tension and fear, turning neighbors against each other. When World War II erupted, Argentina found itself stuck in a tricky spot. Officially, the country declared neutrality, refusing to pick a side. Unofficially, Argentina's leadership had deep connections to the Axis powers, especially Germany. While other South American countries quickly aligned themselves with the Allies, Argentina hesitated. The military still admired German technology. German companies held significant economic power, and the government showed little interest in cutting these valuable ties. Secretly, German submarines even used Argentine ports during the war, further complicating the situation. Finally, in March 1945, just weeks before Germany's surrender, Argentina declared war against the Axis powers. But it was too late to matter. This symbolic gesture was designed mainly to save face, to prevent the country from being labeled an Axis sympathizer after the war. By that point, Argentina had already spent years quietly supporting Nazi interests behind the scenes. Then came Juan Peron. Peron had been steadily gaining power in Argentina's military and political circles for years. He admired fascist regimes like Mussolini's Italy and Hitler's Germany, seeing their strong central governments and powerful militaries as models to follow. Peron wanted Argentina to become a major global player, and he believed that the former Nazis, with their military knowledge and technical expertise, could help him achieve that goal. Peron had two main goals. First, he wanted Argentina to benefit from former Nazi scientists and military experts who had built Germany's powerful war machine. He believed their knowledge could quickly modernize Argentina's army and economy. But beyond technology, Peron saw political leverage. Sheltering Nazis would strengthen Argentina's global position, allowing him to negotiate more effectively with both allies and former Axis nations. He didn't do this alone. Peron had key allies like Ludwig Freude, a German-Argentine banker closely linked to the Nazi Party. Freude and his son Rodolfo created the Rat Lines, a secret network that smuggled Nazis from Europe to Argentina. The Rat Lines were simple but effective. Escaping Nazis first fled to Spain or Italy, countries still sympathetic to their cause. There, officials provided shelter, fake documents, and new identities. Shockingly, parts of the Catholic Church also helped, supplying false passports and Red Cross papers. Some Nazis even hid in monasteries before quietly boarding ships to Argentina, ready to start new lives far from justice. When these Nazi officials reached Argentina, Peron welcomed them warmly. His government quickly provided them with fake identities, comfortable homes, and stable jobs. Some even ended up working directly for Argentina's military and government. Officially, Argentina claimed it was only accepting talented immigrants who could help the country grow. But behind the scenes, it was secretly protecting notorious war criminals. No one knows exactly how many Nazis escaped to Argentina, but historians estimate anywhere between 300 and over 1,000 senior Nazi officers made it safely to Argentina after the war. If you include lower-ranking soldiers and Nazi sympathizers, the number could be even higher, easily making Argentina the world's biggest Nazi hideout outside Europe. Peron hoped these men would use their skills to boost Argentina's military and industry, but the reality turned out very differently. The so-called Nazi experts didn't deliver any of the promised breakthroughs. Instead of becoming stronger and richer, Argentina found itself facing international embarrassment. By the late 1950s, Argentina's protection of Nazi fugitives had become a major international scandal. Countries like Israel began secret missions to track these criminals down. The most famous case was Adolf Eichmann, who had lived comfortably in Argentina for 10 years under a fake name before Israeli agents captured him in 1960. He was secretly taken to Israel, put on trial, and later executed. Josef Mengele, the notorious Angel of Death, also secretly in Argentina. But unlike Eichmann, Mengele managed to escape detection, moving between countries until he finally died in Brazil in 1979. Other Nazis, such as Franz Stangl, the brutal commandant of the Treblinka death camp, were eventually tracked down and brought to justice. But here's where things get even trickier. Argentina wasn't alone giving former Nazis a second chance. Spain, Brazil, Chile, and even Canada quietly accepted them, allowing many to live comfortable, undisturbed lives. But Argentina stands out for one reason. While other nations covered their tracks, Argentina did it in plain sight. After World War II, the Cold War was heating up, and for the US and the Soviet Union, winning the next war mattered more than punishing war criminals. Suddenly, men who had served Hitler weren't just fugitives, they were valuable assets. The US launched Operation Paperclip, secretly bringing over 1,600 Nazi scientists and engineers. Among them was Werner von Braun, a former SS officer behind Germany's deadly V-2 rocket, built using slave labor. Instead of facing trial, he became a lead architect of NASA's Saturn V rocket, which put Americans on the moon. Others had darker pasts. Some had worked with Unit 731, Japan's biological warfare program that performed horrifying human experiments. Instead of justice, they got new identities, government jobs, and a clean slate. The Soviets had their own version, forcibly recruiting German experts to fuel their nuclear and space programs. Unlike in the US, these men weren't treated as honored guests. They were prisoners expected to deliver results. But Nazi fugitives didn't just land in the US or USSR. Spain became a haven under dictator Francisco Franco, who had ties to Hitler and Mussolini. Brazil and Chile welcomed ex-SS officers while Canada disguised them as refugees. So, if so many countries were guilty of harboring Nazis, why does Argentina stand out? Because Argentina wasn't just taking in scientists and engineers, it was welcoming war criminals. Unlike the US and Soviets, who at least tried to keep things secret, Juan Peron made no effort to hide it. He called the Nuremberg trials victor's justice and insisted these men deserved a second chance. His government gave them homes, jobs, and new identities, but the military advancements Peron had hoped for never materialized. Instead, Argentina faced economic struggles and global backlash. Over time, documents were declassified, investigations were launched, and the country was forced to confront its past. Even today, the full extent of Argentina's Nazi network remains a mystery. What we do know is this: when the Third Reich collapsed, its most notorious figures found a way out. And for many of them, Argentina wasn't just an escape, it was a new beginning. If you found this story fascinating, check out our video on the lives of Nazi officers after the war. You won't believe where some of them ended up.